this week's focus is going to be measuring the rate of a reaction. So we've already looked at different factors that can affect the rate of a reaction, and what we mean by rates, we mean the speed of a reaction. In this video, we're going to look at some starter questions to check you've understood the previous lesson. We're going to look at how you measure rate of a reaction in general, and then we're going to look at how we make a fair test, ensure something's a fair test when we're investigating the rate of a reaction. In the next video, I'm going to do a little home experiment where I'll talk about how we make it a fair test. You can try that at home if you like, and then after that, later this week, we're going to look at monitoring rate of reaction over time. I think that's everything we'll do this week. So let's fire away some starter questions. Oh. Here they are. Right, what I'd like you to do is pause the video and try and fill in the blanks in these sentences. So you'll have to copy the whole sentence out. I actually don't mind if you do this on the computer, that's fine. If you want to type these out rather than handwriting them, whichever way you feel more comfortable. Pause the video now and have a go at these questions. Right, okay, hopefully you've given these a go. I'm going to run through the answers. So, increasing temperature increases rate of reaction. Got this little picture here, so you imagine you've made yourself a nice ham sandwich and you leave it out in the hot sun. Well, what you might imagine is that that's going to go off pretty quickly. We usually keep food in the fridge to stop it going off. When it goes off, that's a chemical reaction caused by bacteria. If we increase the temperature, we're going to increase the rate of that reaction. Okay, increasing concentration also increases rate of reaction. I'm going to get you to imagine you've got a little fire burning. Maybe you're out camping, or you've maybe seen someone like Ray Mears or Bear Grylls do this. When you're trying to get a fire started, what you might do is you might blow gently on the fire. Now, that's not the same as blowing out a candle. When you blow out a candle, you blow quite quickly, and that just covers the flame and carbon dioxide, puts it out. But when you've got a little fire that you're trying to get started, blowing gently increases the concentration of oxygen that's flowing towards that fire, and then therefore increases the rate of the reaction and helps your fire to get going. Right, next one. Something particle size increases the rate of reaction. So again, think about our little fire. If we want to speed up the burning of a little fire, what might we want to do to our logs? Well, we might want to chop them up to make them smaller. So we would say decreasing particle size increases the rate of reaction, and the reason for that is that when we decrease the particle size and we chop something up into smaller pieces, the surface area actually increases. So that means that there's more, if we think about our fire, there's more surface area of the logs exposed to then react with the oxygen in the air. So decreasing particle size increases the rate of a reaction because the surface area increases. Finally, adding a catalyst always increases the rate of reaction. Hopefully that's what you put. So a catalyst is a substance which can increase the rate of reaction. It's not used up itself. That's important. That makes catalysts really, really useful in chemistry. If we can speed up a reaction with something that's not going to get used up, that makes it really, really helpful because we can then do something quite cheaply. But catalysts are specific for each type of reaction, so this works as long as it's a suitable catalyst for the reaction. So something like a chemical process called the Haber process uses iron as a catalyst. Iron doesn't work, it doesn't speed up any old chemical reaction. If you put some iron nails in your fire, it's not going to speed up the reaction, so catalysts have to be suitable for the particular reaction you're trying to do. Right. So we've looked at the factors affecting reaction rate, now we're going to look at measuring rate. I'm going to try and talk through this fairly quickly. You might need to pause the video as I change slides so that you can copy this down as a little note. So, just a wee recap actually, when we looked at the last video, we remembered that a chemical reaction always involves reactants changing into products. Okay, so you can almost, let's just imagine a candle burning. I'm going to just write a very generic word equation. Wax plus oxygen makes carbon dioxide and water. You don't necessarily need to write this down, this is just to remind you. So if we want to measure the rate of a reaction, so to measure the rate of a chemical reaction, we must monitor the change in either mass, concentration or volume of these reactants or products. So if I want to measure how fast a candle was burning, I could either measure how quickly the wax or oxygen was being used up, or I could measure how quickly carbon dioxide and water were being produced. So in chemistry, the way we can make these measurements accurate in science would be to measure either the change in mass, and we measure the change in mass in grams typically in chemistry. We could measure the change in concentration of reactants or products. Typically we measure that in moles per litre. And we could also measure the change in volume of reactants or products. And we would usually measure that in centimetres cubed. That's the measure of volume. We'll look at each one in more detail, but this is just the general way we can measure the rate of a reaction. And we've got to measure the change in one of these quantities, so the change in amount of reactants or products over a certain time period. And we would say the average rate is the change in quantity divided by the change in time. Now I've written this out, as you'll see in your data book. We'll spend a lot more time looking at this equation in more detail, but the rate is the change in quantity, so how much is used up in a particular time, or how much is produced of a product in a particular time. This symbol here, the little triangle with a slightly thicker right hand edge, is the Greek letter delta. And that delta means change in. So when you're speaking about this equation, you'd say average rate is change in quantity divided by change in time. Because we said rate's a little bit like speed, hopefully this might look a little bit like your speed equals distance over time equation in maths. To know how fast someone's going, you need to know how far they've gone, but you also need to know over what period of time. So similarly, when we're measuring rate of a reaction, we need to know how much reactants being used up or product has been produced, but we also need to know how much time that took. Okay, so if you need to, pause the video now and copy this little note down. I've got 2 more to do. Okay, so I've said that there's a few different things we can measure. We can measure mass, concentration or volume of reactants or products, but at Nat 5 we look at a couple of particular examples of this. So we usually look at reactions where a gas is given off. And if a gas is given off in a chemical reaction, it's easy to measure the rate of reaction, because we can do 2 things. We can either collect the gas and measure the volume given off over time, or we can measure the mass of the reaction, because when we've got a gas being given off, the mass of the total of all the equipment plus the reactants will actually decrease as the gas is given off, as the gas floats away into the air. So we'll look at both of these things in more detail. We'll look at how we can collect a gas to measure the rate of reaction, and we'll also look at how we can measure the mass of a reaction to measure the rate of a reaction as a gas is given off. We're going to look at both of these in more detail in a further video this week. And the key thing to note is that by measuring the rate of reaction, so if we can find a way of quantifying the rate of reaction, getting a measurement, a number for it, we can investigate the effect of different factors on the rate of reaction. So that would be if we wanted to investigate what we would say the reaction in a quantitative way. If we have to do a quantitative investigation, you need to use numbers. The reaction I'm going to show you later is just going to be qualitative. We're just going to have a little look at how quickly it happens. Oh no, wait, I think we are going to measure it with numbers. That's good. Right. So, I've just said in a previous slide, by measuring reaction rate, we can investigate the effect of different factors on the rate of reaction. Now what we're looking at is making this reaction a fair test. So when we're trying to make an investigation in science a fair test, we need to think of all the different factors that might affect either what we're trying to measure, so reaction rate, or that might affect the experiment in general. We've got to think of all the factors that might affect these things. We call them variables, and we've then got to make sure that we keep the experiment fair. We'll look at that in the next slide. So all of these are different variables which might affect the rate of a reaction. So we've got the 4 that we learned about already: catalyst concentration, particle size and temperature. But then we've got loads of other things. I would say these are more things that could affect your measurements if you were doing an experiment. So you've got things like the mass of reactants, you've got the equipment used, volume of reactants, any stirring or shaking might affect your experiment, and the time over which your experiment is done might also affect your results. So if you're starting an investigation, a good way to start your planning is to do a little mind map like this of all the factors or variables that might affect your experiment. And then this is the last thing we're going to write down in this video. Okay, so when we're investigating the effect of a variable in science, we must only change that one variable. So to make an investigation a fair test, we only change one thing, and we call that thing the independent variable. I'm just going to add in, this ensures a fair test. Okay, other variables must be kept the same. So actually it's only changing one thing and keeping other variables the same. These two things make sure we do a fair test, and the things that we keep the same, we call them the control variables. We're changing one thing, we're keeping everything else the same, and we're measuring the effect of changing the independent variable. What we measure, so our results, so the thing that we measure is known as the dependent variable. So the thing you keep the same, the thing you change is the independent variable. Things you keep the same are the control variables, and what you measure is known as the dependent variable. We'll look at that in more detail when I show you my little home experiment that you can try. Like I say, you might need to pause this video a few times, make sure you've taken everything I have written down in this video down in your notes.